The potential blackmailer might have been caught this episode. However, solving that problem doesn't mean that the rest of the King's family issues get resolved. To start off, to some surprise, we're told this episode that Melanie and Dana apparently have had a long standing good relationship. Yes, it is not mentioned in episode 1, 2, or 3, despite all that Melanie was going through with Vanessa, but apparently this whole Vanessa wanting to abort him opens up this relationship, and it's. I put it to you this way. The way that Melanie makes it seem, she bonded with Dana because they're both the black sheeps of the family. Dana because he's a little person, and Melanie because, compared to Vanessa, when they was growing up, she was chubbier, often compared to her older sister. And while it didn't necessarily cause animosity the same way you see August have animosity toward Christian, or definitely August, it definitely caused issues in their relationship. So when it came to Dana, because she related to him, apparently those two formed a relationship that, again, for whatever reason, doesn't get revealed into this episode. But being that Dana's as petty as his mama, because it runs in the genes, when Melanie sets up Dana in order to get booked for this magazine called Asset Makers, he decides this is the time to show his behind. During the interview process and photo shoot, he makes sure to big up Melanie while he puts down his wife, puts down Vanessa, just calls her some kind of housewife, random housewife, I think was the specific words. And of course, this even spills over when it comes to talking about Christian, I think, and definitely August. And it's so messy, this family, that they don't even realize during a video segment that as he asks for 5 minutes and the host kind of gives it to them, the camera's still rolling and they're still bickering back and forth while the camera's on. And it leads to the type of moment where there's a bit of a fear that if that video gets out, it can ruin what the family has been doing thus far. Yet, not to be discounted, despite what Dana may think, Vanessa has connections, and with those connections, she gets the video back and gets this whole situation shut down so it won't embarrass the family. And for doing so, it seems Dana's now ready to warm up to her again, but in exchange for the relationship getting better, all that Vanessa asks is that he leaves Melanie alone and, sticks to being on her side, which seemingly he's willing to do, but as we saw early on, back when August and Bridget could have been a friendship type of thing, people do sneak around behind Vanessa's back, so, anything could be possible. Speaking of sneaking behind Vanessa's back, she finally learns this episode about the blackmailing situation, and it's mainly because Bridget decides to open her mouth, probably because she doesn't really give a damn about Vanessa's mental health and whatever reason that August and Dana like to use in order to do whatever bidding they need to do. So, with Vanessa learning about the blackmailing, we get a little bit of a breakdown of what's happening so far. When it comes to the malpractice suit people, they moved to Austin, Texas, and seemingly have moved on, so that marked off of Quincy's list. And then when it comes to the person who was doing some type of Ponzi scheme or whatever that Reginald exposed, they're not even talked about, so let's just assume that Reginald moved on from that. That leaves Otis, and what kind of ups Otis as a suspect is not only Quincy finding out that he has tens of thousands of dollars in his account, but recent purchases that are like a new boat that he purchased, the fact that his wife had cancer not too long ago, and while the King's family helped with that, there could still be medical bills left over that would make it so Otis having this money makes no sense. And another thing that adds on to Otis being a possible suspect is that when it comes to Bridget's new employers, Sean and Sean, who run a winery that's a competitor to the King's Wines, Otis works for them too. Now, how does he have time to both manage one wine vineyard while Christian is doing whatever, like showing off his new girlfriend, and doing his second one? It's not necessarily clear, since increasingly the show is trying to show you that running a winery is not that easy, so something isn't adding up right now. But we're going to push that to the side. What matters is Otis has every single bit of guilty qualities. And then when it comes to August, she tries to protect him because, she doesn't want to falsely accuse a black man of doing something. Yet, then comes Bridget revealing, because Sean and Sean are being blackmailed too, that a type of weed killer got used on their vines when Sean and Sean didn't pay. And with that, Dana's like, enough of this nonsense. It's time to call the cops. And when the cops are called, Otis isn't like surprised that they're coming. He runs for it. And with that, so comes the assumption that he is guilty. But assumption is the key word here. Because finally, for Christian anyway, Bridget's starting to help him understand how to run a vineyard. And he decides to go looking for the notes that they went over, and he finds her bag, goes in her bag, and finds the weed killer that was used on Sean and Sean's vines. And with that, so comes the question of whether or not Bridget is actually the blackmailer. Our first highlight is just seeing Dana being his mother's child. The amount of petty when it comes to him talking down about his mother and everybody else in that family when it came to his interview, it was comical, it was beautiful, and I don't know, it really does make you think that this show is a dramedy. As much as you can say it's a soap opera type of drama similar to Greenleaf, I feel that at this point it wants to acknowledge and even embrace the humor you can find in these situations, yet make sure there's an undercurrent of drama from Dana's established situation with the whole abortion thing, the cheating that Reginald did, and who knows what else is going to be revealed over the course of this show. The next highlight is the potential for Christian, and that's mainly because Christian seems a little bit aimless as a character right now. Yes, we know he was tasked with becoming a vineyard manager and getting that up and going, but as shown, without Bridget really trying to help him and nobody else really knowing the vines, that pretty much just put it out. And while Yvette kind of like said, hey, why don't you get to know the people and stuff like that, that hasn't really gone anywhere beyond him pissing off Otis. And while it was established that, he's bipolar and he has this little girlfriend who he shows around, Christian hasn't really contributed much to the show in a way that made him an asset. But with him possibly learning that Bridget is far more nefarious than she may seem, there is the chance that he may develop into somebody notable on this show and not just. In terms of on-the-fence topics, the first one has to be Melanie and Dana's relationship, and it's not the relationship itself because you can understand why those two would bond. The problem to me is just it coming out of nowhere and Dana, to my memory, not really being Team Melanie in episodes 1, 2, and 3. He was more so worried about Vanessa's mental state and all that, and you didn't see him like August sneak around so he can, keep bonding with this woman who apparently he has this long-standing relationship with. Instead, he seemingly was all for her being tossed aside, and only coming onto her side once he learned that Vanessa wanted to potentially abort him. I hate to sound like a broken record, which is why we're not highlighting Yvette in the consistency she gives or Vanessa in her situation anymore, but it's hard to let go of this Kelvin and August situation just because it's such a disappointing storyline thus far. I mean, let's talk about them as individuals first. Kelvin was supposed to be Melanie's lawyer, and yet it seems that went to the wayside. August has not so far kept up with the deal that she promised, signed on, whatever, and the complication of her ex being her aunt's lawyer and everything that could have brought to the show got dropped. So, as an individual, Kelvin is just failing. And even if you want to bring in his whole getting divorced thing and having a kid, it's And in this episode, they tried to build him up even further beyond the divorce, beyond having a kid, and talked about how he was in foster care, and the reason why he had to distance himself from August and the King's family was because he wanted to be his own man and not rely on them, specifically their money, in order to build himself up. Instead, he wanted to do it on his own and show that if he ever did get back with August, it was because of him wanting to and not feeling obligated to because of all that her family did for him, and it just seemed like the natural process since pretty much he was already in the household. Which I get, but at the same time, it still doesn't make that character pop. And then switching over to August, I feel that she is just the lead because they say she's the lead and not the lead because she's truly leading the show. Her storyline is weak right now. She's the CEO and is focused on his dessert wine, and outside of that, the only other storyline she really has is with Kelvin. In terms of this blackmail thing, Dana found a PI who was his frat brother. In terms of the Bridget thing, that's pretty much dead because now Christian's gonna be on that, and on top of that, you have Rose who befriended Bridget to kind of bring that in. So, what is August doing as the lead here that's supposed to make her, the person we're supposed to be mainly focused on? Nothing. And then you put Kelvin and August together, and it's not one of those things where they boost each other up despite having iffy storylines or even character development. If anything, they just falter together to the point where it's like, how am I supposed to get into this relationship when you have two weak characters together? Never mind, in terms of August being in a relationship with Kelvin, I just don't see her as the type that's gonna be willingly dating a man who has kids. I don't see her as the type of woman who really is gonna be able to wrap her head around, I'm gonna have to be number 2, possibly number 3 if case Kelvin's really trying to be a good dad, and if something goes down with Sonia, him being there for her because, that's the person who helps him raise the kid. So there's too much stacked up against this relationship and no strong reasons to invest in the characters as individuals besides the little anecdotes they give us every now and then. So I just don't have a lot of interest, and have to admit I'm having decreasing amount of faith that they're gonna make anything of these two characters as they continue to build other characters in ways that, hell, even in the case of Christian could potentially surpass Kelvin and August depending how they handle this whole him being the first one to figure out that Bridget might be playing both sides, if not somebody who needs to be watched out for. As of now, I want to say the Kings of Napa is starting to really settle in and establish what it wishes to give fans and how it wishes to explore characters. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to its lead, the lead remains a bit hollow and underdeveloped, but considering the boost we saw with Rose, the one that's pending for Christian, and how most of the family has found their niche eventually, there is still the need to hope for August. It's not that strong, but there still is the need to hope. And who knows, maybe it's just being delayed because she's going to have a big pop later on in the season.